Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ag Innovation News Podcast, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. I'm Dan Scogan, your host for the Ag Innovation News Podcast. Guests on this program will shed light on innovations in value-added agriculture, highlight important voices and work that's being done throughout the Minnesota ag sector, and educate the public about resources and organizations that support Minnesota agriculture. Today, we welcome to the Ag Innovation News Podcast, Kat Duvic. Kat is the founder and owner of the now-defunct Social Mixers, LLC. Today, we're going to be taking a little walk through the whole process that many entrepreneurs go through as they attempt to bring their ideas to reality. Kat, welcome to the program.
Hi, Dan. Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start with background on you so people get to know you a little better. Tell me about yourself and a little information on the road you took with Social Mixers.
My name is Kat, and I am actually the co-founder of Social Mixers. I co-founded it with my husband. I started working on the concept in 2019. It was inspired by some work I did. I had apprenticed with an herbalist and learned a lot about working with plants and knew I wanted to do something with that, but wasn't sure what. I got the idea in 2019, pivoted the business completely and launched it in 2020. And now I'm in the process of closing it in 2024.
So what were you creating with Social Mixers?
It was all natural, organic, simple syrups. Syrups that could be used in a variety of beverages, mocktails, cocktails, coffee. A lot of people would use it with just seltzer, just something that was really delicious, really natural. And what I really wanted to do was create something that was unique flavor combinations. But also I like the idea of creating a product that brought people joy. And to me, there's nothing more joyful than a really tasty beverage.
Not necessarily an alcohol mixer, though. Is that right?
No. And in fact, that was kind of a funny thing is my own personal journey. During this whole process of starting the business and closing it, I actually pretty much quit drinking. I don't say I'm sober, but I just don't really drink anymore. And so the world of mocktails is a very fun world. You can have some really creative, fun drinks with that. But even going back farther, the initial idea that I had was inspired by a latte. It was a coffee in a coffee shop is what gave me the initial inspiration of making these syrups for beverages.
So what did the timeline look like, Kat? How long did you create a product for the consumer and start to finish? Was it 2 years, 3 years? How long were you involved in the project?
It was roughly about 3.5 years. Started working on the business in 2019. My original concept was I wanted to wholesale floral syrups for coffee shops. So the idea of making rose syrups and lavender syrups and sell those to coffee shops. In 2020, when COVID hit and all the coffee shops closed, that's when I had to pivot. Decided to go towards more of a direct-to-consumer model. So launched the business officially at the Fulton Farmers Market in July of 2020, and then did that for 3.5 years. Made the decision towards the end of last year to go ahead and wrap it up.
COVID really wasn't your inspiration to create the product, but it may have been your downfall. Is that fair?
I don't know if it was the downfall because, it was funny. The original concept, it was so different. I don't know that a wholesale floral syrups would have been successful. I don't know if that would have, it'd be revisionist history to say like, oh, well, if COVID never happened, we would have been able to do this totally different business. That could have bombed with the first pitch. So I don't want to say that that was the downfall. One thing that was very interesting, though, about the syrup and the drink market is during COVID, at-home cocktail drinking really exploded because people weren't going to bars. We were all stuck at home. And there is a little part of me that's like, oh, man, if only I had the ideas like 2 years before. Like if we had 2 years to get the business going and really get established, we could have really capitalized on that surge because now that market is kind of more flatlining now that people are back out and about. And also a lot of people quit drinking alcohol and so went to mocktails, which as I mentioned is this really fun world, but it's also kind of a different world too. So I don't know if COVID really was the downfall, but it did put us on a path that was different than the original vision. I'm not saying one or the other would have been better. Our whole business was direct to consumer and wholesale too, but not in the food service realm. We wholesale to stores, liquor stores, businesses like that.
What was the consumer's reaction to your product?
People loved it. I kind of equate this to starting a business is like when you have a party and you invite everybody for 6 o'clock and 6 o'clock rolls around and no one's there. And at 6:05, you're like, are people going to come to my party? And they show up. That's how I equate launching a product. You're putting something out. It's very personal to you, especially, I mean, I formulated these syrups. So they're very personal to me. And it's like, is anyone going to buy them? And people did. And that was exciting. And then the next question is, will they buy them again? And they did. And doing the markets, especially our first year, was really valuable because we got that firsthand feedback of how people were using it, how they like to use it. And that's also when I learned that initially we were like, oh, cocktails, everybody's drinking at home, it's COVID. But what we found is more people were just adding it to seltzer. I used to say SodaStream owners were my best customers. It was exciting. People genuinely enjoyed it. And people whose opinions that I trusted, people that work in the food and beverage industry, they liked it. And that was also just really affirming.
Were you making it out of your home or did you have a co-man someplace?
I wasn't making it out of my home. I mean, I did the formulation in my home kitchen, but when it came time for actual production, I worked in shared kitchens the whole time. Started at City Food Studio, moved to Seward Makes, and then I was in the Good Acre a little more than 2 years. So I was doing all the manufacturing myself, which kind of led to some of the closures, which we can talk more to, we can definitely get into that, how production helped move us forward with deciding to close. But no, it was all me. I mean, if you have a bottle of social mixers, I am the one that made it.
And I think for entrepreneurs that are listening to the podcast today, it's important. You made a statement about getting that feedback that first year. It's important to get it out there and then listen to the consumer's reaction.
Yes, absolutely. That was huge for us, was to just hear what they liked because we had a product that like it's not ready to drink. You have to mix it with something. So hearing more about how they were using it was invaluable when we thought about future products, which we wound up not bringing to fruition, but it helped direct how we did our marketing, how we communicate to use it. I was creating these really complicated cocktail recipes and realized people don't want that. They want simple. And so that was great. It was also a little tricky though, because when you have people that can taste the product in front of you, we had one of our syrups, lime coriander. I love it. I think it's delicious. Everybody who tasted it, people would taste it and go, this must be your most popular flavor. It did horrible. It never sold well. It was a national finalist for a Good Food Award. Like people loved this flavor, but there was something about the name. I think coriander just turned people off. So that was sort of the flip side of that is, you're getting people talking to you in person, but then you also have to think about those consumers that you're not physically in the store with, having them sample.
Kat, at AURI, we often focus on new products or processes that are successful. Social mixers fell a little short of the original goal, in my opinion, maybe not in yours. But did you see some successes?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of view it as overall, I'm closing a business that has zero debt and I've got money in the bank. So it's not a ton, but I'm happy with that. We're not losing anything. When I think about like future projections and I looked at different paths we could take, some of those, it could have been really bad. And I'm proud of the fact that we created something, that we brought a business from idea to fruition. I don't think makers and creators get enough credit simply for that. Everybody has ideas, but to take the idea and actually create something that people get to enjoy, I think is huge. So I think that's a success. I mentioned our lime coriander syrup. We were a finalist for a National Good Food Foundation Award. I'm really proud of that. We had repeat customers. I would meet people, and when they found out that I was behind social mixers, they knew what the product was. And that was really exciting because they weren't even like my friends, that was cool. I mean, I think of other successes. We had distribution. We had a liquor distributor that worked with us, that believed in us. I personally was selected for Lunar Startups, which was a local business accelerator. So yeah, there were definitely successes, even though the business is going to cease to exist and become a chapter in history. There were still successes within that chapter.
So who's the entrepreneur in your family? Is it you or your husband?
I would say both of us are kind of equally. I'm the one that has the crazy ideas. I've got kind of the weird visions that when I describe them, they probably look a little more Monet than, they're not quite clear. But I think equally, I think to have like a family business, I couldn't have done this without his support. And he believed wholeheartedly. He was the one, because I had so many different ideas. He was the one that came around and was like, I think there's something about that idea. There's something there. So I got to give Joel credit.
I want to remind our listeners that you're listening to the Ag Innovation News podcast presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. And we're visiting today with Kat Duvic. Kat is the founder and owner of the now defunct Social Mixers. We're talking about her journey from startup through success and then into the shutting down of her company. So, Kat, when did you realize things were starting to change, or you thought you might be in trouble, or that you may be on your way out?
Sort of a lot of little things. Those little things start to add up. Mainly, I would say it was a lack of labor for production, or just really not able to scale up production due to a lack of capital. What had happened with us is we hit a wall with production. So it was, as I mentioned earlier, it's just me in the shared kitchen. I did have some help from Joel. At one point, he had actually gotten laid off during this time. And on one hand, it was great to have the support in the kitchen. On the other hand, somebody has to be working. We needed to bring in income. But that's probably a whole nother podcast, is how to have a small business when you're both working in it. But back to our production, with the just me, there's only so many bottles I can make. I was in a shared kitchen, so there's not infinite time in the kitchen. I'm sharing it with other makers. And I was starting to personally get really burned out with production. But we needed to make more product to serve our demand. Our Amazon store was doing really well. So on one hand, it was great. We had sales. On the other hand, I wasn't able to make the product fast enough. So we decided to look into co-manufacturing. Found a company. They were local. The size of the runs was perfect. It would really allow us to triple our current batches, which I found very manageable. Some co-manufacturers, you're having to do like 10,000 units. This was significantly smaller. So I was like, this is great. And it would allow me to focus on sales, because I would need to, at that point, really amp up sales to sell the additional product we would be making. Here's where I started to see the reality. With co-manufacturing, the price was right. It wasn't that they were going to be insanely more expensive, but the larger runs meant I need more bottles. I was going to have triple the size of ingredient orders. So all of my upfront expenses were going to go up. Needed new labels because we're changing our manufacturing address. With new labels, require about $1,000 in setup fees. Well, with the new setup fees, figured may as well do the redesign that we had been talking about for years. We wanted to redesign our labels. That was something we really believed in too, that I think would have helped our next chapter as we expanded the brand. Our warehouse at that time had announced limitations on storage. So we would have had to find a different place to store all of this finished product, because even though we were having our sales were up, we still were going to have more product right after the run that we had sales for. So we need to store it in the interim. And so it was just a lot of little things. And so I started doing the math, because it was like, okay, to get to this next chapter, what is it going to cost? So did the math and realized it was roughly $50,000. I didn't have that liquid, so we just don't have that lying around. And so you start to look at the options of how do you come up with that. For us, it was we could take out a loan, equity against our house. We could go into our retirement investment. We are very lucky. I also want to make that really clear. I feel very privileged to the fact that I was able to do this business, that we were able to put this out, and that we would have had means to be able to invest. I didn't want to risk my house. I didn't want to risk my retirement. So the next side is, okay, raise money, find investors, friends and family, or find angel investors. I didn't feel passionate enough and committed enough to risk my future. So why would I feel comfortable asking people to risk theirs? In the end, it just didn't feel right to move forward, because I started looking at those different scenarios. If this didn't work, what would have happened? And some of it was maybe just fear, but I just didn't feel at that point. It was like something about that moment. I was like, I don't think I'm committed enough to be able to risk this. And so that was when we ultimately decided, you know what, it's time to close. Because the other alternative was keep going where I was going, or figure out, is there a way to stay small and yet be able to be profitable? And I think there is a way to do that. I just couldn't figure that out. And I don't think I had the patience to figure that part out. So that was the end.
Through the process, I would guess that you were networking with other entrepreneurs. Are these typical barriers that you saw entrepreneurs dealing with?
Yeah. I think that's also it too, is I'm looking around and I'm seeing there are some incredible success stories. There's some huge success stories, particularly in the Twin Cities, that are really exciting. And I also see people that have that same barrier of capital. You need money to get up to that next step. And that's really tricky. The past couple of years, we've seen the increase, the price of everything went up. I mean, my bottles doubled in price, ingredients got more expensive, and this is something that impacts every entrepreneur. But I think that is the tricky thing, is when you want to get to that next level, in order to do those larger production runs, in order to meet that demand. And when I say the next level, even if it's a small run, a limited run in a big box store, you're doing a trial run in 8 stores, it still requires significant investments to move up to that next level.
Did you ever think of putting it up for sale?
We talked about it. In the end, the challenge with our business is, even though it was profitable, it sustained itself, it didn't have the value to generate a sale. We actually kind of casually looked. We reached out to a couple complementary businesses that we thought might be interested more in the IP. Our formulas, our stuff has all been tested. It's solid. We have good processes, but there wasn't. We kind of half heartedly did that. So it just didn't make sense for us. We just never quite got to that size where there was that value of being able to get acquired.
Kat, we have just a few minutes left, and I want to get a little more on the end days of your story. Is there anything that you wish you had done differently?
Okay, this is going to sound kind of hippy dippy, but I am one of those where I believe the journey is ultimately the reward. So, like, if I say, like, oh, well, if I did this differently, if I did that differently, some of that is, again, revisionist. I don't know how it would have changed. I will say, though, and this is sort of something I think all entrepreneurs need to think about, we wasted a lot of money on unnecessary consultants. There's a lot of consultants in this community, and some are fabulous and great, and their hearts are there and they are awesome. And there's also some that aren't. And I think the best value that we got working with outside folks was, got to give a shout out to AURI. I mean, the amount of value that we got for what we paid for was huge. And I tell every single maker, if they haven't talked to AURI, to talk to AURI. Also, Lunar Startups. That was a great value for us. That was the business accelerator I was in. And the amount of wisdom and knowledge and help and expertise I got was fabulous. But there was also a lot of consultants, independent ones, that charged us a lot of money, gave us a great vision, and in the end didn't deliver. And so that is the one thing that I look back, especially now that we're looking at what we have left. And I'm like, man, if only I didn't spend $5,000, I'm like, oh, that could have paid for a nice trip somewhere. But it is what it is.
That might be the answer to my follow-up question. I was going to ask you, what do you know now that you wish you had known earlier?
First off, I will say, from launching the business, I wish that I knew about AURI. I initially spent thousands on working with a freelance food scientist who I had found on Facebook. So that's one, is like, because then when I found out AURI, I was like, what? And we had to reformulate anyway. So I wound up getting all of that through AURI. So I wish I knew about them initially, because I would have saved a good chunk of change.
Any plans to regroup or bring the social mixers back?
I think that chapter has ended. I still make syrups for fun. I had some friends and actually some customers that reached out really kindly when I announced the closure on Instagram. Oh no, we're going to get my rose syrup. So I always tell people, hey, stay in with me. I'm still going to make it for fun. I'm just not going to make it as a business anymore to sell. But if we keep up, I'm always happy to slide people some stuff that I make for fun.
So, Kat, what would your message be to other entrepreneurs who are thinking about food and beverage?
I think it's really about defining success on your own terms. And that might mean growing really big, getting acquired, seeing your products on the shelves of Target and Whole Foods. But I think it can also mean selling out at the weekly farmers market, or still having a passion for what you're doing 5 years in, 10 years in. Because one thing that I found too is everybody has an opinion on what it means to be successful, and you're never going to meet other people's expectations of it. So you need to meet your own. And so I think that's really important. And to also to get really clear on where you want this business to go. That was something, I guess, to answer one of your earlier questions, what was something that I wish I knew earlier? It was to kind of have an idea of what the end game was, because I was like, I'm just going to make syrup. It's going to be fun. And I think if I was a little clearer, I would have A, not started the business, or B, I would have started it, but gone a totally different approach to it. I would say that define success on your own terms and have an idea of what your end game is. Is it to get as valuable as possible so that you get acquired? Or is it that you want to have a nice small mom and pop business, have it support your family, and then be able to leave a legacy? Because there's two different approaches to those businesses.
Well, you and your husband are entrepreneurs. Typically, that means you're working on something else. Anything you can share that we might want to look for in the future?
Well, as I mentioned, I only make syrups now for pleasure. Because I'll have my syrups available at parties. But I actually went back to the health and wellness world. So it was a world I was in before. I teach yoga and I am opening, I guess you could say, okay, fine. Between Joel and I am the entrepreneur because I am opening an energy and bodywork practice. So, and this was something that I've studied for years. And so I'm just really excited to be able to do that. And I like to think that everything I learned during the social mixers era, and I would say to have the courage to have built social mixers and to be able to close it is giving me the courage to take on the next chapter. Though I do have some ideas kind of connecting health and wellness with the natural food and drink industry. So I may still be around.
So does your health and wellness business have a website that people could go to?
Yeah, so the website, I'm building it right now. Still in the process of dealing with the closure of social mixers, but the website is about to go live, but it's my name. It's katduvic.com. And so people can check that out, learn more, see where I teach classes, or if they're interested in coming in for a session, would love to see them.
Well, Kat, as I told you before we started today, this is a different type of entrepreneurial story. We so often focus on those that are super successful, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs go down the road that you went down, where it just didn't work out for whatever reasons. And I just want to thank you for being willing to share that and to speak truth to the world of entrepreneurial work, because it is difficult some days. And I'll give you the final word. What do you want people to know?
I mentioned this actually earlier before we started recording about how I think this is an important story to share because I think we so often view success on that frame of being huge, getting acquired, becoming a national or global brand. And it doesn't have to be that way, that it can be small. But also, too, that this story that I shared is also my story. And if somebody listening gleans something from this, awesome. That's great. But also understanding that my experience isn't going to be yours. I share this because I had a fellow maker come up to me when I announced that I was closing. And he made a comment about how every time he sees a business close, it shakes him to his core because he sees like, oh no, that could be me. And I have to say, no. Like we're all on our own individual paths. And so I really hope that this has inspired people. I hope people have gotten something from this, but also know too that your journey is completely unique to you. And just because I closed doesn't mean you're going to close for whatever, just because my journey is different than yours. It's just really appreciate your own path and journey. That's going to be my final word.
Nice. I want to thank you for your time and wish you well on your next journey.
Oh, thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for letting me share this story. I appreciate it.
We've been visiting with Kat Duvic. She is the founder and owner of Social Mixers, a company that she developed and then put to bed after about a 3-year run. And I think it was an interesting story and interesting perspective on what it's like to be an entrepreneur. I want to thank you for joining us today as well and listening to the Ag Innovation News podcast presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. I want to thank my podcast crew of one, Lisa Martinez, AURI Communications Manager and editor of this production. To learn more about AURI, you can go to auri.org.